Okay, everyone, while we wait for the others to come in, I'll just slowly get started. So the first thing I notice is that a fair number of you have actually submitted Lab Zero, so we're only missing about another 20. My recommendation, again, is to do it by tomorrow at midnight. If you don't get it done by then, do it whenever you can, but I recommend it be done sooner rather than later. Has anyone had any trouble with Lab Zero that they need help with or anything like that? I know Kali can sometimes be tricky to install if you make a mistake. No, going once, going twice. Okay. All right. So let's wait one more minute for this quiz to open. So I've been getting a lot of email from you guys lately, and I have no problem with that. So whenever I get email from you, I pretty much have to respond to it right away, or I'll just be thinking about it the whole time. I've responded to you guys while I'm walking my dog, while I've been in bed, while I'm watching TV, while I'm out with my friends. Whenever I get the notification, I respond to it right away. But the volume is increasing, and I wouldn't mind that if it wasn't questions that I've already answered in lecture or in announcements or in the syllabus 1, 2, or 3 times. So today we're going to go through a participation quiz to go over the things that I guess I'm not doing a good enough job of making clear so that everyone's on the same page. So I think the quiz should be open now. If you guys want to go ahead and fire that up, does everyone want to take a minute to load up this quiz? So this is for participation points. You can do it as many times as you want so you get the right answer. I'm just trying to get everyone on the same page. If it comes off as passive aggressive, I apologize. I really don't mean for it to. So first question, I've been getting this question a lot. What's the deal with the labs in this course? Other versions of the questions are, when and where is the lab meeting? Can you post the slides? I only see lecture slides. Why hasn't the lab started? I can see we have a scheduled lab time on Dell Online. Do we have to attend these? Is it okay if we attend the labs another time? Are the labs done with a different Zoom link? So I've gotten all those questions since our last meeting, so I want to go over this again. The answer, it's a multiple choice. So the answer number 1 is the lab time is scheduled for Wednesdays at 2:30 to 4. That's the time that the registrar gave us before there was a global pandemic. None of the labs or anything like that were adjusted to compensate for the fact that we're now online. So there's some redundancies in the timetable that they're not going to fix because it would be too labor intensive. All labs are posted on September 18th with slides and videos, so that's tomorrow. We're currently working pretty hard to get those up. You might get a quick delay on some of the videos, but most of the content is already up and just waiting to be released. Synchronous labs don't make sense in a pandemic, so you are trusted to manage your own time. The TAs have flexible schedules that allow them to support you at your own convenience. So if you've got an issue, just text one of the TAs and they'll set up a meeting with you. They're all very good at managing time. That's one of the reasons I picked them, is they're the kind of people who, if you message them, they'll be like, oh, great, I'm happy to help. I'll switch gears right now. They're not the kind of people that will say, oh, I'm already doing something else, can you schedule something? They're very good at scheduling their own time. Since you all have the lab time slot in your calendar anyway, one thing I recommend you guys do is use that time for group work should you choose to do a group-oriented project, because that's a time that you're all blocked off. So obviously the answer here is none of the above. Question number 2. Let's say a participation mark, lab, or milestone has a due date on Brightspace before December 9th. You submit your work after the due date, but before September 9th. This should be December 9th. Pat and the TAs will still mark your submission. True or false? Anyone from the chat, true or false? True, exactly. So when I put due dates on Brightspace, those are suggested so that you don't get overwhelmed. So every time there's a participation point, my instinct is just to put it for the next lecture, so that if you're keeping up with it, you only have one participation point to do between each lecture. And if you do it right away, you don't have to worry about it. You can submit anything up until December 9th and we will mark it. The submission folders all close on December 9th. So then basically the rule is if Brightspace takes it, we'll mark it. Where is the only acceptable place to submit participation points, milestones, and labs? Email, texting, Brightspace, or Microsoft Teams? So what's been happening a lot is the second I announce what the participation activity is for that day, I get like 6 or 7 emails saying like, oh, here's my screenshot. There's no way I can be organized enough with my email to get those marks directly onto Brightspace, especially when considering Brightspace is much more in tune with how your final grades are going to come out. At the end of the term, whatever Brightspace tells me your grades are, that's what your grades are. So it has to come from Brightspace. So please, whenever I announce a participation activity, don't send it to me via email, because then it won't get marked and then you lose the points, and that's no fun. Okay. If you are asked to submit proof of interacting with a resource for participation points, what should you do? Okay, so this is the same as the last one. You just take a screenshot and submit it to Brightspace before December 9th. So if you're not at home, or you're someplace where you're taking a lecture some other time or whatever, and you do your, just gonna mute everyone. Cool. Please be careful with your microphones, guys. There's a high risk of embarrassment if you don't realize your microphones are on. Take a screenshot, submit it Brightspace before December 9th. As long as it's in before December 9th, it'll get marked. Question 5, what is the only acceptable file submission type? I'm sorry I have to mention this again. People keep submitting multiple stuff, or they keep submitting bad file types. We can't mark them when they're like that because it breaks our flow too much. So what happens when they come through is Brightspace will render a PDF or will render a single image screenshot for us to do, and then we can mark it right away. But most other file types, especially if it's a zip, will make us download it to our home operating system, open it that way, then all of our windows that are carefully arranged on our screens go wherever, and then we have to go back. It just wrecks our flow process. And when our flow process is slowed down, that means there's a delay in getting you your grades and your feedback. So it really helps you to help us on that one. I refuse to take off points for this because I just think it's cruel. So rather than taking off points, we just reject the submission and get you to redo it. Okay, this is the last thing. A lot of you guys like to call me Professor Crysdale or Mr. Crysdale in emails. I actually have a strong dislike for honorific titles. When I was in elementary school, there was this one time I had to bring something to a teacher, and I didn't know the teacher's name, and I just like 5 seconds beforehand heard someone call her Sue. So I went up to her and I was like, "Here you go, Sue," and then she like smacked me and was like, "No, it's Mrs. Martin to you." And I'm still bitter about that. So I definitely am not gonna play that forward. I like to have an equal playing field, and I kind of just like my name. So don't call me anything else. I don't have a PhD. I don't have tenure, so I'm not a prof and I'm not a doctor. And Mr. Crysdale sounds too much like my dad. And is that where I got that from? The Reginald thing that was stuck in my head the whole time? King of the Hill? Interesting. All right. So all you have to do, submit those, and you are more than welcome to submit the quiz. Oh, that's what it was. It was stuck in my head all day. Thank you. Thanks, Eric, for letting me into my own mind. You guys can submit this as many times as you want till you get 100. I'm sure you'll get it right in the first time though, and there's not a time limit or anything. Cool. Next. So we are getting into the part of the term now where this course count goes from a weekly lecture where we all get together and talk about hacking, and it's going to start turning into actual serious real work in about 24 hours. So I've uploaded the requirements for milestone 1, and they'll be available at midnight tonight Halifax time. But I'm going to go over it with you so that you know what my expectations are. And then if there's any questions or things that we need to clear up, I can make the edits before midnight so that other people will be aware. So this is milestone 1. You are coming up with a proposal for your project. I was wondering if we could do an assignment where we build a bot to buy the RTX 3080 off NVIDIA's website. You can do that in your own time if you want to. That'd be pretty cool. I just wouldn't trust my credit card information to bots. Okay, so for this lab, for this milestone, it's recommended you do the first 3 labs. One's on the introduction to Git, the one on frameworks and APIs, and the one on documentation. So framework and API will help you decide what strategy you want to go with for the project you're going to build, and documentation will tell you what my standards are for writing good docs. So group work or individual work? In a non-pandemic world, we would insist on group work. However, we anticipate that online learning group work with worldwide participants to be a problem. So I can't really see it being good for you to force you to work together with a bunch of people from all over the world on a project where you never get to meet in person. So I'm going to let you work individually, which is not something I would normally do. But you do have the choice. You can work in groups or you can work as individuals. If you want to be an individual, you do not have to tell me. So how I program Brightspace is it thinks there are 65 one-person groups right now. And if you send me an email saying what your group is, I will just move you out of your one-person groups and into a collective group. If you stay on your own, you're already set up to be individual, so you don't have to tell me. For your first milestone, you are to create a proposal for an e-commerce application. This proposal is worth 10% of your final grade. Your proposal must be approved by the instruction team before you proceed to milestone 2. If we reject your proposal, you'll need to make adjustments and resubmit. The main reason for this is that last semester, a lot of people didn't think through what they were going to design, and they submitted website proposals that had lots of buzzwords and things like, oh, we're going to build a site that has a PHP framework with a Node backend and React and Angular. And it's just like, pick one. Will marking become more difficult as the number of people increases in groups? In theory, marking would actually get easier because, but I have to put it in Siri. In theory, marking will get easier the more of you are in groups because there's less to mark. The way we tend to do things is we break it up based on people's expertise. So it really wouldn't change anything. It's just if you're in a group of 5 people, I expect higher quality than a group of 1 person. Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. It's another note on marking. And don't worry about marking. I've got way more TAs than I can imagine. Like, I've never had this much TA support. So the TAs all got the maximum hours they could by the union, and they still let me get an extra TA just in case there's overload. That's how committed Dal is to ensuring you guys are well taken care of in the pandemic. So not to worry, we will mark everything and turn it around pretty quick. Okay. So anyway, such a configuration, as I say, like one that has a PHP, Angular, React, Node framework, would be really interesting to me to see if you could actually do it. But it doesn't have any, it's not really good practice for industry. So my goal for this course is when you guys leave Dal, everyone looks at BACS and BCS graduates and says, wow, Dal's really killing it with industry preparation. Like, these people are ready to work. So I won't approve any proposal that doesn't meet that goal. I want you guys to build something that actually you can put on your portfolio that'll be unique to you from everyone else around you, and you can show off your code and show off the things you've learned. Because one of the problems that you'll encounter if you haven't gone on co-op yet, and I had this problem a few years ago, is you go into an interview, and especially if it's your first co-op, pretty much everyone else whose first co-op is everyone else who is also their first co-op, that's your competition. And if you don't have a portfolio of individual things, it's hard to stand out. Because I remember we made this alarm clock in assembly language, and the guy before me was like, oh, I told them about the alarm clock we made in assembly and they loved it. They were super keen on it. They were like, you can't believe you could do that. And then I went in thinking that they were gonna also swoon at me for the same project. Then they realized that everyone they could pick from this cohort has done that same project, which basically means that any awesomeness that could come from that project is completely canceled out. But when you have an individualized web project that you can brag about and talk about specific choices you made, that's going to have you stand out on co-op and in your first couple of years of industry. So what will you build? This will not be a rudimentary application that shows an example of what technology is capable of. This is not a create an account, log in, create an account that can create more accounts, buy stuff, log out. This is making something that is actually of a caliber that could be deployed. We can't tell you just go code, because we need you to build something that is meaningful, that has an idea you've wanted to go with. So if ever there's something you were like, oh, there's a website I've always wanted to make or an app I've always wanted to try making, this is a really good time to work on that. So in my first web project, can we use code from an e-commerce project that we've already built? Did you already get academic credit for that? I can't give you, I'd have to check. I don't know if I can give you credit for work you did before the start of the course. Send me an email on that and I'll check, because I actually don't know the answer. The question was, if we already have done something like this in the past for a startup within pretty recent amount of time, can we build off of that? If you want to build off of it, that's one thing, but if you can't submit that project, we'll talk offline and I'll make the answer known once I know it. So on my first web development contract, I used to be a lifeguard, and the company I worked for was this it was a really interesting company, because what they would do is contract lifeguards to hotels and condos and apartments and that kind of thing. And the guy who ran it was like a business genius. He was like a serial entrepreneur. Like, he owned like a cab, and he owned like hundreds of acres in Gatineau of land that he was developing. He always had a business going. And I met him, and he was like really interested in my computer science knowledge, even though at the time I'd only done like 2 semesters. And he brings me into his office, and he's like, do you want to make some code for me? And me being the kind of guy that just says yes to things, was like, sure, even though I really don't know what I'm doing. So he paid me just above minimum wage to make a site, and that site is where I learned almost everything I know about web development, especially the things not to do. And one of the things I did was I made the user interface, but just at the bare minimum level that it needed to be. And anytime there was any administration needed, I did it through PHPMyAdmin, or I did it through FTP, or I just edited it like in the database. And that's kind of useful, because then you can charge your hourly rate for doing these administrative tasks, but it's also poor programming practice, and you don't want to be selling an incomplete application. Despite the fact that likely all of you will do this at one point in your careers, because they might not even want to pay for it. Like this guy, he didn't even want to pay for security. He was willing to take the risk because there was so little that could be done if it was penetrated. So what I want from you guys is an application that is able to do all of the tasks it needs to do for all of the user roles through its interface. So if there's a responsibility that a manager has that's different from an end user, that has to be able to be done through the interface. So you need to have an idea. So for example, we'll go with Uber for a second here. Uber has passengers, they have drivers, and they have corporate. So once you know what your idea is, you're selling ride sharing, for example, then you know what your roles are, but you can't know that until you have your idea. Like last semester, we had people that did like did a pet rock pet store. So like you could buy diamond encrusted like accessories for your pet rock, and they had people who bought them, and they had like people who were selling the stuff, and they had like moderators of the site that were keeping it together. Your proposal should include information on the service, why it's needed, what features it will provide, and the different types of users. You also need to talk about how your app will be secured and your plans to support mobile devices. The minimum expectation is that the application renders on 4 different types of devices: desktop, mobile, tablet, and at least one Internet of Things device. That seems like a lot when I say it, but is there anyone here who doesn't know how to do responsive web development? It should have been covered in your last class, the prerequisite to this one. But is there anyone who's never heard of responsive web development, or who would be scared of writing like a website design for a mobile phone? Is there anyone that doesn't know how to do that? You can message me privately. I need to know because I can do a whole lecture on it if not enough people know. Okay, so should I assume that everyone in the class? Okay, so we got, okay, so we will do a class on this. And yes, you can just use Bootstrap. So you can either use a framework or you can do what's called responsive web design through CSS, which is basically a CSS command that says, if the screen is bigger than this, do this. If it's smaller than this, do this. And the industry has defined standards for what a desktop screen is, what a tablet screen is, and what a mobile screen is. And all you have to do is put in these very basic commands that are very ubiquitous, and then the website will render the CSS rules based on the screen size. And I can show you how to do that, let's say on Tuesday's lecture. So it's not as scary as you think. You don't have to make 4 different websites. It's just that you have to make CSS rules that apply for everything. Media queries, that's right, Deep. What's the next thing? Did I have another question? Yeah, so what's an IoT device you'd use? So it depends on the need for your application. So we go down here, we can say, if you're making an e-reader, I don't think you should make an IoT interface for the car. That doesn't make any sense. It makes even less sense if you're doing a GPS application and you give like the fridge as an interface. Those of you who've taken my 3160, do you remember what meta functionality means? Vaguely? Okay, we got one person. Let me see if I can pull up the way I always remember it. Is everyone in the chat seen the movie Spy Kids 2? In this movie, they talk about these other spies that have really fancy watches. And in those watches are so cool and they can do so many things that the developers decided not to put a clock in them. And then the rivals actually got the prototype that the clock was a new feature. So the term meta functionality refers to the idea that if you make a device smart, you can't take away its original purpose. So a wristwatch that does everything under the sun but doesn't tell time is not a wristwatch. So when you are deciding what app you should use or what device you should use for your app, think about the meta functionality, right? Like what device is going to benefit from the service you're providing? And some combinations just aren't compatible. I don't expect too much in terms of development with the IoT. I just want you guys to start thinking about the fact that the way the web is going, we're transitioning to 5G networks. So 5G networks, which is what I'm doing my doctoral research on, they are designed for the Internet of Things. They are designed for every device that you can think of to not connect to your Wi-Fi, but to connect to cellular networks. So smartwatches, smart pencils, cameras for police officers, body cams, like tracking for vehicles, all that's going to connect to cellular networks through 5G. So you guys, to be competent in 2020 in web-centric computing, you need to start thinking about the role that 5G and IoT will play in your devices. If you're secretly panicking right now that I'm going to make you learn a new programming language to program the Apple Watch, it's not a thing. I just want you to start thinking about what the designs would look like and maybe start looking into some of the basics for the design strategies for IoT and possibly some light coding if you're looking for a way to stand out. Okay, So here is a sample proposal for what I'd be looking for. Overview of your team or your personal experience. So those would be things like what relevant courses have you taken? I don't need to know if you had a philosophy minor like I did, by the way. You should tell me if you had some co-ops that are relevant. You should tell me what languages that are relevant that you might need to know, just so I have an idea of what your team structure looks like. Like if you're all people who worked on co-op and did JavaScript, that's just going to be a different mental model for me than if you're all people who are developing for the web for the first time or for the second time. The reason I want to know that is I want to be able to adjust my lectures and adjust the content I deliver accordingly so that I'm reaching the right audience, as well as so that I can tell you if your project is feasible or not, because some of you might bite off more than you can chew, and gives me an idea of what you're capable of. Give me a summary of your app, who will use it, why is it helpful? We just talked about this. Security risks you need to take on to be functional. If you're selling things, you're running a store, you have to deal with the credit card transactions. However, I will say that you should never process those yourself. You should always get someone like PayPal or Shopify to do it for you, so that the risk and liability of getting sued should something go wrong is taken away from you. But that being said, there's still a level of security risk that's taken on with running a store. It makes you a target to people that want to hack e-commerce, for example. But there's plenty of e-commerce sites that don't handle transactions. They get their money through a different way, like advertising or like, actually advertising is the main one I can think of, but like advertise-based models or tracking-based models, that kind of thing. So you have to think about the security. Like if you've got an advertised-based model for your application, you're going to be much more interested in privacy because you don't want concerns of people saying, oh, this place is selling my data. That actually brings me to a fun side note. One thing I created in the last couple of years that's been really interesting for tracking who steals data is I bought my own domain name, patcrysdale.com, and I just have an email server. And the email server is a wildcard. So you can just keyboard smash at patcrysdale.com and it'll get to me and it'll tell me the URL that gets used. So every time I go to a place that wants my email and I think they might, I don't want to give them my data, I give them the name of the company at patcrysdale.com. And then whenever I get spam, I can look and be like, oh, this was sent to Best Buy at patcrysdale.com. I guess we know who's been selling the information. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with privacy. Is Best Buy didn't actually sell my information, but if you, how do I put it? If you are dealing with that kind of data, like even an allegation of privacy breach can be huge, like a huge risk to your company. That's like financial risk because you might have to pay out a settlement or something. Describe the tech stack you will use. So you have to come up with a plan. I trust by now, where did I buy that domain from? GoDaddy, then I hosted on Proton Mail. Describe the tech stack you'll use, what frameworks you'll employ, front end, back end, and database. You should be working on, you don't need to start coding yet. In fact, I don't want you to start coding, but I want you to think to yourself or think to your group about the way you already know how to code and if that way works for you. And if that way works for you and if there's something you want to learn. You are given an incredible amount of freedom on this project. So if there is a web technology you want to learn or a niche language or a niche strategy, this is a fantastic time to learn it. So take the time to evaluate. If there's something you want to learn but don't know how, propose doing it and let me know that you don't fully know that way, and I will make sure you get to the right TA that can, or myself, that can teach you. If you choose group work, include a team charter that discusses weekly meeting time, a platform for discussions, how decisions will be made and conflict will be resolved, and a tentative schedule. If you are forming a group, the first question I recommend you ask each other, do C's get degrees? There's nothing worse than pairing someone who won't do anything to get an A+ with someone who's happy with a C. That combination is the worst for a professor because I hear both your sides and I agree with both of you. So make sure you are all in the same mindset should you choose to work together, and that you have ways of handling conflict. And because I don't have formal deadlines, you should have deadlines amongst yourselves so that there's no stress. If you choose to work as an individual, give me a rough guess as to the timeline you're going to use so I can see if there's like a sort of standard timeline everyone's coming up with, or if it's sporadic, because that way I can know when the other professors are really coming down on you guys, so I can know to back off a bit and make sure you have breathing room. If you choose to work as an individual, schedule again. Let me know if there's any supports you might need, because you don't have a team to fall back on, so I'll make sure the TAs are there for you more than ever. And if there's anything you want to learn. Finally, the best proposals justify every decision by comparing all available options. Does anyone have any questions? So Chad's asking about meta functionality. He says meta functionality is basically how the device interacts with the different functions it has. No, meta functionality is the function of the device before it's smart. So like before a smartwatch is a smartwatch, it has to be a watch, and for it to be a watch, it has to tell time. So the idea is that if you take away the meta functionality from a device, it's no longer that device. So if you take out the clock from a watch, it's no longer a watch. It's just a fancy gadget. Does that answer your question? Okay. So hint, the best proposals justify every decision by comparing all options available. Let me pull up the rubric. Okay, so it's out of 18. I would have loved to have made it out of powers of 10, but Brightspace is only so accommodating. I'm not sure if it's possible to build a full secure e-commerce individually. How feasible is it actually? There's no such thing as a fully secure, and we just ask that you try your best, and we'll take it as it comes. Don't feel like you have to do it all in one night. We're here to help you. It is feasible, and if it comes to the fact that it turns out not to be, we will be extremely accommodating of that, so you don't have to stress. The last thing I want in this class is people that are stressed out because they think they've taken on too much. My assignments are difficult and they are lengthy, but I'm not unreasonable. If I find that too many people are too bogged down, we will make compromises so that you can learn and not be spending all your time on this course. Okay, so this is the rubric out of 18. First thing is to meet expectations and get an 80%. You just have to give me everything I asked for, follow the structure, and give me a document that is completed professionally with no grammatical, structural, or formatting errors. A grammatical error is like you use the wrong word or you clearly didn't proofread. A grammatical error is not you put a comma when you should have put a period, or you could have used a semicolon. Can we have a small networking session in the chat sometime soon? I don't know if most of the people are here. Ooh, that's actually a good point. Someone in the chat was asking if there could be a way to meet people. I'll think of something. Can someone suggest a great way for people to meet each other for groups? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Thanks, Chad. Helpful. Discussion board it is. I will make one after I talk about the rubric. Okay, so for this one, document is completed fully with professional no grammatical errors. Again, this is an English class. I'm not assessing your English ability. It just has to be professional in a way that if you were my employee and I received this document, that I would think it was professional and not rough. Should you exceed my expectations, you can include more information than I asked for. You can improve on my structure, or you can use formatting and styling that makes the document stand out from the others professionally. Your tech stack, this one is actually pretty important. Your proposal makes technical sense and is feasible. So you need to thoroughly justify what you're doing and how you're going to do it. The more clear it is to me, the more it's going to make sense. And the more sense it makes and the more I think you've thought about your strategy, the more we start heading into surpassing and exceeding expectations. So how my rubrics work, by the way, is, since dividing out of 6 isn't something that's entirely intuitive, surpasses expectations means you got 100. Exceeds expectations means you got between 90 and 99. Meets expectations is between 80 and 89. Approaching is 70 to 79. Below expectations is 60 to 69. And then because in the faculty, we don't give grades, you can't use a grade less than 60 to be a prerequisite or to satisfy degree requirements. I don't even bother with grades below 60. Below that is 0 to 59. Does that make sense to everyone? I do try very hard to keep it here, especially if I make you redo something. I do try to make sure that happens. It's a real morale booster when you start getting in danger, real morale ruiner when you start getting in that danger of below a C. And finally, the function of the app is clear. Roles of the users are well defined. So you've explained some light use cases of, if we get told to redo something, will we get regraded? Yes, but there will be ceilings on the regrade. So for example, if you get told to redo something, you're probably gonna be scoring less than 60 on the original. And depending on how badly it was or how much change there is, we'll probably max out around 60 or 70 on the regrade so that there's still a learning experience, but it's still fair to the people that got it right on the first try. Okay, function of app is clear. Your roles are well defined, so I know what your users are doing, why they need to do it, and the way they're gonna do it. Your interface for IoT makes sense and is justified, and you've thought about the security risks of your application. Does anyone have any questions here? No, we're all in a good spot. Everyone feels good about this milestone. Right on. All right, so before I forget, cool. So you guys can just go into the discussion board and find group members that way. Did you say what the maximum amount of people we can work with is? I'm gonna say 5. If you wanna go 6, you just have to give me a really good reason, but anything more than that and you're actually putting a huge strain on yourself. So we'll say 5, 6 is the max, but I recommend 3, 4. I'm not sure about what security measures to use. We're not talking about what security measures to use. I just want you to identify what security risks there are. So if you are going to run a new banking application, you should be talking about the risk of financial theft, the things that could destroy the company that's running the app, because all apps run for a reason. And the biggest threat to security is whatever commodity it is that that company is managing, or whatever service it is that company is providing. The biggest risk is some hacker coming in and taking the value away, either by stealing something or by making it unavailable so that people go to competitors. So for example, with Uber, we want to make sure that it's available all the time so that people use it. So a big threat to Uber would be a dedicated denial of service attack where everyone attacks the Uber servers and people get tired of waiting, so they call a Lyft or they call a taxi instead. So we're not talking about how to mitigate those risks. We're not talking about what technologies to use to fight back. We're literally just saying, for the service you're providing, what security risks are going to be inherent to your business model. it's impossible to run a bank and not worry about bank robberies. You can't run a grocery store and not worry about food contamination. There are natural risks to everything, and I want you to start identifying them so that in milestone 2, when you go to write your security plan, you have some idea of what's going on. Does that answer your question? Does anyone else have? Perfect. Does anyone else have any other questions before I start going back to the slides on usable security? Okay, perfect. Oh, one more thing. I rewatched my video from last class, and I saw that the chat wasn't recorded, even though I had it in what I thought was the window to record. So I guess I can't record the chat, which takes away my concern about privacy. Would people prefer if I uploaded the videos to YouTube rather than Brightspace? I know there was some request for that, but I can do both as well. I just would be, if anyone has any privacy concerns or preferences, I'd just like to be aware. YouTube, no, yes, doesn't matter. Brightspace is fine. YouTube's nice for speeding up the lectures. Okay, well, I can start looking at putting them on both then. Okay. So I believe this is the last slide we left on. Am I correct in that? Can anyone tell me, make sure I'm in the right spot? I don't want to jump over anything. So I would have just talked about different ways to attack passwords. So actually, let's go with bugs. When you guys learned, password trip is last that I remember. Okay. When you guys go to write your code, I'm sure at some point or another you've been told that bugs are inevitable. If you've taken the ethics course, Darren Abramson, who is one of the great philosophy professors, will do the math to show you that it is impossible to take the time to test every possible case for all of your programs. So we have to assume that all software has bugs in it. And your goal with testing is to find the bugs before the bad guys do, because they could be exploitable. As an example, in old video games that have long been released, speedrunners who want to play the game quickly for world records are always looking for bugs in the game's code so that they can achieve new speeds and new ways through the game. And when a game gets really popular, you can see that worldwide people are testing the same kind of software over and over again every day on their live streams, trying to find bugs that can put them ahead. It's the same thing with banks. Every day people are probing the bank servers. Every day people are probing Fox News, CBC. Every day people probe eBay, seeing if there's something in the code somewhere that they can use to hack. These are good guys, bad guys, in the middle. Doesn't matter. There's always people looking for bugs. Most bugs are made from mistakes by people in the program's source code or its design. That's the wrong kits, my bad. I'm sure I don't have to explain to third-year computer science students the origin of bugs, but anytime there's a flaw in your logic, there could be a bug. Morally gray. Thanks, James. Anytime there's a flaw in your logic, there could be a bug. And the problem is humans are illogical. Humans created machines, therefore machines are illogical. Humans are flawed, therefore machines are flawed. Bugs are encountered with updates and patches released by the software company. That's why we're always getting patches. That's why even if you do your updates every day, more are coming in because they're patching it just as quick as the hackers can find them. And the more used something is, the more testing it gets done. There's something called zero-day exploits, which are when the hackers know about it, but nobody else does. And those are usually the things that cause the most damage. If an exploit is able to be exploited before anyone knows about it, that's usually tremendous damage that can occur. For example, look at Heartbleed. Fortunately for us, it was someone at Google that found that, but if one of the bad guys had found it first, no website in the world would have been safe. Is there anyone that doesn't remember Heartbleed, just so I have a sense? 2014, there was a flaw found in SSL, which is Secure Socket Layer, that is pretty much how we handle most of our exchanges of encryption keys through HTTPS, which is how all application data travels securely on the internet. This guy at Google was able to figure out how to decrypt any HTTPS traffic and get the payload, which meant that pretty much, for all intents and purposes, all data traveling on the internet over HTTPS might as well have been traveling unencrypted. It was patched that day, but the problem is, just because the people who write these patches have put out the patch doesn't mean that every web server in the world has updated to the latest version of HTTP. And because of that, I think it was like $100,000 or some insane amount of money to the person hoping he got a huge bonus. It was like, I remember thinking like, that's a lot. And what started happening was websites would offer tests of Heartbleeds. You could, like, on social media, you could like test if your bank or like test if anyone you did business with was vulnerable to Heartbleed. And this actually caused huge PR issues, seeing as HTTPS is the minimum requirement for encryption. So sometimes sites would be vulnerable to Heartbleed, but they would have their own additional security measures in place that would make it not matter that they're vulnerable. So I remember CIBC had a huge scandal because they had to go and explain all the levels of additional stuff they do, and that's why it doesn't matter if they're vulnerable to Heartbleed, because they do their own encryption and all this. And then I remember thinking, but they just revealed their encryption strategy to explain this, which is kind of a bad move, because now the hackers know more about them. So anyway, that's your hacking history lesson for today. So this slide is actually a really interesting one, in my opinion, because it's really the crux of what it is we're looking at in this course. There is a central computer, which is called the server, that is running an application, and lots of people are interacting with it all at the same time. So we get a device user, we have an attacker, we have a stolen device, and we have a malicious machine that can all be attacking a server at the same time. So in the bottom right, we have someone who's using the application as appropriately, but the other three are all malicious actors. So for example, we get bottom left, someone who's sniffing the app data over Wi-Fi or over GSM, which is a cellular network, trying to see how the app works to see if they can replicate the data. Another person is reading the application memory of the app, either over a browser, either through their browser or in their local machine. And doing so, they're able to create scripts that can be used to cause damage to the server. And that is really the thing that we're really concerned about, is when you folks put up your websites and your e-commerce applications and you're out there in the world, you're not protecting yourself from one person at a time. You are protecting yourself from a wide variety of attacks all at once. So you can think of yourself more as the guy in the castle who says when to fire arrows, or the one that says when to bring the drawbridge up. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't get, is they think it's a 1v1. It's not really. We as the white hat team, we have to constantly be on our guard. The companies are constantly paying us huge sums of money to be awake 24/7, and the trade-off is you can be in the middle of Christmas dinner and get a notification saying there's an attack and you have to go in. They're paying for all this time because you never know what threat it's going to be, and there could very well be two threats at the same time. In fact, I would be surprised if any of the major companies like Amazon weren't fending off at least 2 attacks at the same time pretty much every minute of the year. I don't think there's any publicly available data on it, but just based on how many cyber attacks happen in a given year, it seems seems like a safe bet. So we have to design our applications in a way that are exploitable, but then we get things like it could be bugs. There's always insider threats, and there's always human error. And these are things that are working against us. Further, for all the hackers that we fend off in a given year, if one gets through, it's not a good look. Has anyone ever heard of the IT guy psychological complex? The IT guy, it's the IT guy problem. So I always kind of make this joke whenever people complain about IT. It's that anytime IT is discussed, it's always whether or not they should chop them out of the budget. If everything is working, what are we paying IT for? And if everything is broken, what are we paying IT for? Sitting around all day. Like, there's no way to win when you're in IT. So if one hack gets through, you can have data that you stop 999,999 attacks, but you let that one get through and it costs $2 million, it's not a good look. And then there's always reactionary politics. So if it's you who's in charge of security and they got through, you could be trouble. But there are ways of mitigating this. So I used to work for a company called Pythian, and they are a very weird company. They're kind of like the corporate version of an adult that never grew up. I loved them. They are so much fun, but they are an international company that has a startup culture, and they have data centers in all 7 continents, but they do not coordinate their ideas at all. So like you'll be sitting in a meeting and some boss will say, hey, we should just expand into this area and start doing it without consulting anybody. So it's a very unusual company. And I worked in security there, and we had to do an audit. And auditing is your best defense against the IT guy complex. So what an auditor does is we bring in accountants, actual money accountants. What those firms are expanding to doing now is not just money, but also assessing the risk of cybersecurity threat to an organization. And what they do is they give you this massive list of things that you have to be thinking about. Like, is data encrypted in transmission and at rest for every single way it transmits? So one of my jobs as a co-op student was gathering this information. And I had to go into Google's terms of service and get screenshots and URLs and everything I could to prove that Google was responsible for that. So then we put it in the file to the auditors. And basically, if the audit passes, it's this giant folder that says, we've been certified to do every little detail we can to make sure there isn't a cyber attack. And because of that, if there is one, our insurance will cover it. And that is the best defense against a cyber attack that I know of, is making sure it's somebody else's fault. The best way to get away with anything when you make a mistake is insurance saving you. If insurance doesn't cover you because you haven't done an audit or because there was a vulnerability that you could have stopped within reason, it can usually mean a lot of trouble. There's always a contingency plan. So whenever money is being exchanged on your e-commerce site, you always want to outsource that. Shopify might take a huge chunk of how much money you're making, but if there's a data breach from credit cards, you can just be like, hey, it was Shopify. They were the one who did it all. And then everyone points at laughs in Shopify. They take the heat, and then you go somewhere else or you stay with them. It doesn't matter. You always have to have that plan. And that's the whole response to the ITI complex, is make sure you're neat. Absorb the risk. Exactly. So when you are working to protect your castle or your organization, keep that in mind. That's all I wanted to say on that subject, is there's going to be lots of threats. You want to make sure you're good. And the best way is to audit. So let me tell you guys about some types of attacks. We'll be seeing some of these in the class. Some of these I might show you if ever we have a day where we just feel like hacking things. We can go through some missions or something on Hack This Site, and I can show you how to do a couple of these. So first off, spoofing. I'm sure we're all familiar with the term. Actually, do I want to explain these properties first? Yes, I probably should. So There are different security goals. Some of them are, those all different ones. Oh, perfect. I thought this was a later slide. Thanks, past me, for figuring out a problem that I wasn't aware of. Okay, so authentication, integrity, non-repudiation, confidentiality, availability, and authorization. Those are security goals. Authentication means make sure that the person claiming to have an identity is associated with the privilege they're trying to access. So when you go to the bar and they ask to see your ID to make sure that you're of age, that is authentication. When you go to access a folder that is restricted and it asks for your password credentials, that is authentication. It is comparing that you, who you are as a physical being, is the same person as the identity that is permitted to have and have access to that resource. Integrity, we have to make sure that the data is true data. If banks were just making up the numbers, we'd all be in lots of trouble. So we have to make sure that all of those things in our database are as exact and true to real life as they can be. Non-repudiation means that for everything we do, there's a record of it so that we can always come back and say, this is how it happened. Confidentiality, I don't think I have to explain that one. There's some things that are just best kept secret. Availability, the inverse of confidentiality. Some data just has to be available. For example, if you are running a website for the city bus system, your website has to be available all the time. Otherwise, people won't know how to get where they're going. And finally, authorization is the approval to access a resource, for a given identity to access a resource. And people always say, well, what's the difference between authentication and authorization? Authentication is the checking of the approval, and authorization is the stamp on your identity that means you can't do it. So there are some things that we can do to avoid these security goals. So spoofing means you pretend to be somebody else. That's using a fake ID to go to the bar. You can change someone's DNS settings so that they resolve the legit domain names to fake sites. That would be spoofing. So if you come to my computer and I'm not paying attention and you change the DNS server and I go to Google and I end up with your fake version of Google that's got a password sniffer, that is a spoofing attack. Tampering, modifying data or code. So if I get access to Scotiabank's MySQL database or whatever kind of database they use, it's probably Oracle, and I add a few zeros to the end of my bank account balance, that is tampering with data integrity. Repudiation and non-repudiation. So if I can provide evidence that someone other than the attack, like say I'm a hacker, if I can provide evidence that somebody else did the bad thing I did, there needs to be a system that says, wait, no, we have more records than this. You can't just produce a single record. We have verifiable actions to make sure that everything is legit, because all you need is one false accusation with no records to tear an organization apart. Confidentiality, all you have to do to breach that is be a whistleblower. Availability, to breach that, you have to make things not be available. And authorization, that's when you are standing on your tippy toes at the amusement park so you can be tall enough to go on the ride. Now we've got different types of attacks. Accidental discovery, this is a very dangerous one. If ever you are screwing around on some network that you have authorization to be on but not authorization to test, and you find something odd, you do not investigate it. You do not do anything other than call IT and go, hey, this looks really weird to me, and I'm just reporting this because I think it's a breach. Then you might even get like a little commendation from IT for saving the company. If you start investigating that, even the littlest little bit, and your 100% true intention is to give more information to IT, you are no different to them than the hacker that will abuse it and steal all the company's funds, money, and information. The second you find a vulnerability, if you are not authorized, you must back off and notify IT. Automated malware, programs or scripts which are searching for known vulnerabilities, then report them. So a couple of tools I can show you how to use another day is one called Nmap. Nmap will scan any IP range you want for all available port numbers and what software is available on those IP addresses on the other end, and that way you can identify what's an email server, what's a mail server, what's a web server, what's a personal server. You can scan all of these things and start building information. The last time we ran this class, IT didn't have enough time to develop a pen test server for us, so I just took my 10-year-old iMac and put it on the publicly facing internet and told everyone it was cool to attack it. And the amount of scans I got from random bots all over the world that were probing my machine was intense. It was more traffic than the people actually trying to break into my machine that were authorized to do so. There are always automated scripts going around. Similarly, there are other tools that can check if a given server has vulnerabilities or unpatched software based on data of known exploits. So what people tend to do is they scan the web looking for IP addresses, and once they find something that they're looking for, let's say a web server, they run the vulnerability scanner on it, and if it's got a vulnerability, they attack, and then they try to monetize that somehow. There are ways to prevent this: for one, changing your port numbers, and two, making sure you've just got passwords and everything else so that they can't be brute force automated. There's a video I saw a few years ago. It was actually really interesting. I'll see if I can find it again. It was about a guy who used to be a burglar, and he was driving around with some YouTuber, and he was saying, I'd rob that house, never that house, and never that house. And he was explaining why he would rob, which houses he would rob and which ones he wouldn't. And his reasonings were things like, if there was a dog or an alarm system, it's not that those things would stop him. It's that the possible reward is not worth dealing with all of those things if the guy next door has neither and leaves his door unlocked. And the other thing is, not everyone's front door is as visible from the street as everyone else's. So there's risk of getting caught, risk versus reward, things of that nature. But he said, like, if some guy was known to have a gun, a dog, an alarm system, and an electric fence, but was also known to have $1 million in cash, they would go for it. It's not those things will stop you, it's that the risk becomes too great for the possible payout. And the exact same is true for the people that are scanning the internet constantly. The curious attacker, a security researcher, or ordinary user who notices something wrong with the application and decides to pursue further. I just warned you guys not to do that. Script kiddies, these are the former me at age 12 of the world that learn that you can type start into Notepad and name it with I think .dat. You can make little scripts in Notepad that do things like open the start menu endlessly and the computer has to be restarted. These are people that take code that's been written by other people that barely know how it works and they've just seen a YouTube video and they try to be trolls on the internet. They're usually nothing more than trolls. Every once in a while there's one that's strong enough to launch a meaningful attack, but it's very rare, and usually like you're able to recover from it. The motivated attacker, potentially a disgruntled staff member with inside knowledge, or a professional paid attacker. .bat file, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you, people who know Windows. I haven't owned a PC since 2010. I've been using Mac and Linux since then, and I got a Mac for my birthday when I was in grade 10 or 11. So actually grade 9 maybe. So I've been using Mac for so long that I don't know anything about how the way Windows works, but I digress. A disgruntled staff member, you have no idea the amount of damage an IT guy can do if you are ever in a position where you have to fire an IT guy, kill their access before you fire them. There's so many stories in the world of a web developer or a sysadmin getting fired for frankly bogus reasons, and then on their way out while they're gathering their stuff, typing some command that just ruins everything, and then they have to go either hire him back or hire someone else to fix it because he's been gone for a day, and they don't even clue in that, yeah, that's the command I was thinking of, rm-rf star. And they'll run a command like that on the server, and then if they were fired for budgetary reasons, like why are we paying for an IT guy, they either get hired back, or the company realizes it's them, and it becomes a whole other mess. Professional paid attackers, if you go on the dark web and you've got even $60, excuse me, if you go on the dark web, $60 in Bitcoin can go a long way. You can hack into Facebook accounts and Gmail for usually much less than that. How are they going to prove it's them if the whole system is gone? You would be surprised at the power of modern computer forensics. You could do, there is a lot you can do to figure out who initiated the command. Especially like when something is deleted, what's actually happening is the data isn't being overwritten. There's just a single bit in each row of data on the hard drive that says this is being kept or this can be overwritten. So when things are being deleted, they just write all those bits to 0 to save time. They don't actually go and securely erase line by line, so someone can plug one of those drives back into a computer and reflag all the bits and see what the system is. And even when that's done, there's still other ways. I guess I can tell you guys this. I don't think it's a state secret. This one time when I was shadowing an ISSO at Defense, I met the coolest guy I've ever known. His job was Professional Destructor. Seriously, that's his title. And his job was just to destroy things that were either confidential or secret that the government didn't want anymore. And what they do for hard drives that are secret and above is insane. So the first thing they do is they take the drive apart and they take the discs off the platter. Then they put those discs through the shredder. Then they hit the giant pile of shredded discs with an incredibly powerful magnet and shake it around. Then they set that on fire. Then they mix that with other things and spread, and then take the pile of things they've mixed up and take the bits to different places. And I guess this has been decided, this is what's needed based on years and years of people forensically recovering data. You'd think that, but again, the payoff, right? So the more money you're willing to put in to recover a drive, the better. Especially if it's top secret data. I mean, why not just melt the disks? Because that doesn't change the polarity of them and you can still read them. I don't know enough about physics to know that for sure, but I know they have to get hit with a magnet or something. And at any rate, the government is always going to do things overkill, because what happens if they just throw these hard drives out and somebody figures out launch codes or whatever it is? What was I talking about? So they destroy these things. They destroy these things constantly. That's how they do it. But there's always a way to do the forensic recovery if they're motivated enough. Paid professional hackers, we just talked about that. You can pay people to hack into things for you. Organized crime. If you think the mafia doesn't have hackers on their team now, look up what happened to Anonymous. Does everyone remember Anonymous from 2011, like the guys with the Guy Fawkes mask? Have you wondered what happened? Have you wondered what happened to them in the last few years and why we haven't heard from them? They got into, if anyone's not familiar, they got into it with the Mexican drug cartels, and the cartels hired hackers. They came back. What do you mean? For a while, I'm not sure. I haven't heard that they're back. For a while, there was a lot of them. It must be a new group of people, because the core group of Anonymous from back in the day was all different. That's entirely different group of people. The core group of Anonymous from 10 years ago was killed by the Mexican drug cartels when Anonymous tried to expose them. I always think of Anonymous as sort of a loosely organized thing anyway, but I'm not an Anonymous historian, so if you guys know more than I do, let me know. But what was I saying? Definitely a core group of them got killed by the Mexican cartels. And a lot of the organized crime in the world now is, as you guys know, hackers. We also get people running the CRA scam, which is always my favorite time of day when CRA calls and tries to scam me in. I always try to keep them on the phone for as long as possible. Um, and what they're doing is a mass social engineering scam. Like someone called me just the other day, and they were like, "What's your name?" And I gave them like a silly name, like I need a bath or that kind of thing, or like what's the one I used? Seymour Butts, that kind of thing, like these fake names. And they're taking it seriously, and they're saying, well, what's your postal code? We have to look up your file. And I would say B3H4R2, because that's Dallas postal code. So I always use that one whenever they call. And they'd be like, oh, we see, sir, that you owe $20,000 and there's a cop coming to arrest you. And I usually when that happens, I get too tempted to say things like, oh, bring it on, let's see if they'll take me alive, that kind of thing. And they always hang up as soon as I know I'm screwing with them. But that's an organized crime syndicate. So we're affected by them every day. People just don't think of it the same way, because we think of organized crime as like the Godfather and that kind of thing. All right, insider attacks, the worst and hardest kind of attack to stop. The only real way to stop these is to make sure that you have lots of internal auditing and you have lots of record keeping. If you are working anywhere where you have network access, do not brag about it on LinkedIn. As I told you guys already, hackers spend lots of time on LinkedIn looking for what you're bragging about having access to, so you become a target. When you're inside and past the veil of security, it is so hard to detect you. It's total Trojan horse situation. Like if you're above suspicion and you're on the inside, like I remember this one time we were looking at one of the things that government is always concerned with is if people are putting personal media on their network drives, because that means the government's always investing more money in removable storage and network storage. And if you've got like a bunch of movies on your drive, they want to get rid of that because that's a waste of taxpayer money. And every once in a while, there's a big scandal because like some guy who's just like high enough that he's like kind of important will have a big scandal, and you'll find out he has all the Harry Potter movies and he has all the Lord of the Rings movies or something. And I remember one time we were like running a scan for these files, and the owner of the process, I mean like the operating system process, or not the operating system, the drive, who had the owner permissions, not the user permissions, but the owner ones, was my boss. And I was like, hey, Adam, have you ever met this kernel before? Like, he's like, no. And it turned out that my boss had created his account like 3 years ago. And because of that, he retained the ownership of that drive. So even if my boss had put those videos there, he would have insane plausible deniability to be like, yeah, I probably have ownership of hundreds of drives in the region. And we'd all go, yeah, no kidding. Like your admin credentials must get used like 50,000 times a day. Like, of course it's going to be on every process. And then we'd ignore it and move on. And then if we'd ever catch him, who knows? All right, social engineering. This is, again, back to fake CRA calls, tricking people into things that, tricking people into doing things. No one in the world is immune to social engineering. The person I know who is the closest to being immune is Dr. Hockey, because social engineering only works if you have something to hide. And Dr. Hockey just doesn't have anything to hide ever. So like this one time when I was teaching 2201, which is the InfoSec course, those of you who have taught it with me, we were talking about planning an attack, and we decided we were going to hack Kirsty Hockey. And we came up with a plan, and everyone had these convoluted ways of getting the password. And I said, well, knowing her pretty well, I bet you if we just start talking about password making strategies, she would just tell us her password and then talk about how she created it. And sure enough, I went to talk to her and just mentioned passwords, and she brought up how she did. And I said, that's exactly what we thought. She goes, yeah, but the thing is, I have to want to keep that a secret. And I go, well, is there anything you don't want to keep a secret? And she's like, no, I'm open. If people want to look into my life, that's their responsibility. Like I've seen her wave her credit card in front of the class, and like show people the number of it just to show the security of them. And I remember thinking, like, that is someone who has so little to hide and is so confident that they are as close to unhackable as can be. The only other, actually, I can't think of anybody else. People are not aware of the value of the information they possess. So we get people that go, well, what can you do with my data? And you go, well, it's not really what you can do with your data individually. It's what you can put together to create an attack on you. So if on one website, like Ancestry is an awesome site for hacking, because what people do is they put their whole family tree, you know, all the way up, and every piece of information they have about their relatives. Then they go and secure their bank account with their mother's maiden name. And then if you're trying to hack someone and it says, what's your password? What password? You go to reset it, seeing if you can social engineer it, and says, what's your mother's maiden name? Hello, Ancestry, let's see if they know. And there's a chance they do. So that piece of information of putting your ancestry up and building your family tree, totally awesome, but it also associates more identifiable and usable information about you that can put you at risk. Oh, where's my screen? Why are we not? We talked about this already. All right, what are threat models? Don't worry about the class discussion. I clearly haven't changed these slides since last time I used them. Think about who is the attacker. So this goes back to what we're talking about in milestone 1, which is it's impossible to run a bank and not have to worry about bank robbers. It's impossible to be a bus driver and not worry about people trying to hop on for free. There are some things that are inevitable with the territory, and it's just part of the game. You don't need to guard against bank robbers if you're running a muffin shop. It's an entirely different world. The thing to worry about if you're running a muffin shop is someone comes in who's allergic to peanuts, takes one of your muffins, and goes into anaphylactic shock in your store. There's a chance someone might come in and rob the muffin store, but that person really hasn't thought that plan through. All right, we'll skip that. Do this one, I'll skip these two. Okay, so we're going to go back now and look at more types of attacks. So repudiation, non-repudiation, which we talked about earlier. How to defend for those is strong authentication. So things like two-factor authentication. If I can get your mother's maiden name, but I can't get access to your cell phone number to get the 4 digits I'm sending you, that's a big deal. Because the only way to spoof those is to use what's called a femtocell and spoof your the person's phone number much quicker, and that's a very expensive and laborious process that is a bit tricky to pull off. You can look at auditing. So for example, I've been using Proton VPN a lot recently because I love Hulu, and every time I log into something now, it'll be like, this is a weird login. You're trying to log in from New York or from California. So they block that login and get you to authenticate. We look at that based on your browser timestamp and signatures and that kind of thing. Confidentiality, we look at encryption, access control lists. That's what ACL stands for. So access control lists usually say allow, block. So we say, for example, it's your transcript we're trying to protect. We say allow students, allow registrar's office, block everybody else. We often keep access control lists, the same thing as permissions, the same thing as anything else. With denial of service and availability, you want to make sure that you're filtering and constantly keeping up with where the traffic is, so you know if you have to employ other resources. And elevation of privilege, that's when you can, again, as I said earlier, you can trick the system into thinking you have more than you are. And the best way to do that is with combining access control lists with permissions and privileges, so that there's many different ways that you're authenticated all in the same go. Spoofing, again, like when you go to the bar and you want to authenticate being 19, just one piece of ID. But when I go to get a passport, they want 2 pieces of photo ID and my birth certificate because the stakes are higher. They want me to do more to authenticate. And it's the same thing here. You know, we have session IDs, you have cookie IDs, you have digital signatures, all these things to build the profile that is you. Tampering, we can do things like code signing and creating hashes so that, like, whenever you go to download something, do you ever notice it says like checksum or here's your your hash to verify? What that means is you can use a command to check your downloaded file to see if it's the same thing as what the website thinks they're giving you. So that way someone can't add some rogue code between the server and the client. I have to admit, I know the full dangers of it and I never bother, but it's a strategy that's used a lot. I've seen people triple ID'd at bars in Halifax. I'm not surprised. All right, we're running out of time, so I will leave it here for today. Does anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like it. So everyone's feeling good about milestone 1, which is going to be released tomorrow, right? And when is M1 due? Whenever you want to submit it. Recommend early October, but whenever. You know my policy on deadlines. You guys can just manage your own time. Just be careful because I expect a lot. So don't put it off too late. If you submit it on December 1st and I can't mark it until December 5th, I won't have too much sympathy when you start milestone 2 and you've only got 4 days to do 4 milestones. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right, well, have a nice weekend, guys. Again, always available on email. If you ask me any of the questions that were available in the quiz, I might not get back to you as fast as I normally would, but otherwise, have an awesome weekend and let me know if there's anything you need.